My boss fired me in front of the entire office because he said I wasn't executive material. He announced it during our all-hands meeting with such contempt in his voice that I could feel every eye in the room on me. I tried to maintain my composure, but my hands trembled as I gathered my things. Then, just as security approached to escort me out, his wife walked in and said 5 words that made the entire room go silent. "She's our new creative director." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'll never forget the look on Richard's face. Pure shock, followed by something darker. Everyone froze, unsure what was happening. The security guard stopped mid-step. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. That moment changed everything. My name is Amelia Chen, and I've always believed in giving everything my absolute best. That's how my parents raised me, to work twice as hard and be thankful for every opportunity. I grew up watching them run their small restaurant 7 days a week, taking only 2 holidays off each year. Their dedication was my blueprint for success. I joined Vertex Innovations 3 years ago as a marketing specialist. The company developed cutting-edge software solutions for healthcare systems, and I was thrilled to be part of something meaningful. My portfolio was strong but not flashy. I'd worked for smaller companies before, helping them build their brands from the ground up. At Vertex, I hoped to finally have the resources to create truly impactful campaigns. Richard Winters became CEO 8 months after I started. He swept in with his expensive suits and Harvard Business School connections, immediately implementing what he called a culture of excellence. What that really meant was a culture of fear. He fired 3 Department E heads in his first month. The message was clear: perform or perish. I kept my head down and worked harder than ever. My campaigns consistently outperformed projections. Our lead generation increased by 34% during my second year. Client testimonials praised our messaging and brand voice, all elements I had carefully crafted. I thought results would speak for themselves. I was wrong. Richard had his favorites, mostly men who played golf with him on weekends or people who had worked at his previous companies. They received promotions, corner offices, and public praise during meetings. Meanwhile, people, like me, were expected to work longer hours with little recognition. Still, I persisted. This wasn't the first time I'd faced an uphill battle in my career. Last month, our marketing director, James, announced he was leaving for a competitor. I had been his right hand for nearly 2 years. I knew our strategies, clients, and campaigns better than anyone. I stayed late preparing my presentation for Richard, outlining my vision for the department and how I planned to grow our market share. The night before my meeting with him, I barely slept. A mixture of excitement and anxiety keeping me awake. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:30, reviewed my notes one last time, and waited outside Richard's glass-walled office. I could see him inside, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up at me with an unreadable expression. At 9:15, his assistant finally waved me in. "Amelia, let's make this quick. I have a board call at 9:30, he said without looking up from his computer. I launched into my presentation, speaking with the confidence I had rehearsed all night. 2 minutes in, he held up his hand to stop me. "I'm bringing in Marcus Reynolds, from Axiom Tech to head marketing," he said flatly. "He starts next Monday." I blinked, trying to process his words. "I'm sorry, I thought the position was open for internal candidates too." "Marcus has an MBA from Wharton and over 15 years of experience at top-tier companies," Richard interrupted. "Vertex needs seasoned leadership, not people learning on the job." "But I've been handling director-level responsibilities since James reduced his hours 6 months ago. Our latest campaign exceeded targets by 43%, I countered, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard leaned back in his chair. Look, Amelia, you're a good worker, detail-oriented, but executive roles require a certain presence. Marcus has that presence. The implication was clear. I didn't fit Richard's image of leadership. Was it because I was a woman? Because I was Asian American? Because I didn't have an Ivy League pedigree? Probably some combination of all three, though he'd never admit it. I understand, I said, though I didn't. I gathered my presentation materials and stood to leave. One more thing, Richard added. Marcus wants to bring in his own team. We'll be restructuring the department. My stomach dropped. Restructuring? We'll discuss the details at tomorrow's all-hands meeting. No need to prepare anything. I left his office feeling hollow. 3 years of exceeding targets, of early mornings and late nights, of canceled vacations and missed family gatherings, all for nothing. That night, I updated my resume and LinkedIn profile. I texted my parents, telling them I might be stopping by for a few weeks while I figured things out. They responded immediately. Our home is your home. Always. I barely slept. By morning, I had convinced myself I could face the day with dignity. I would network with colleagues, gather references, and start fresh somewhere that valued my contributions. I dressed carefully in my most confidence-boosting outfit. A structured navy blazer over a silk blouse, tailored pants, and the red heels I reserved for important presentations. War paint, essentially. The all-hands meeting was held in our largest conference room. All 60 employees crammed in, some standing along the walls. Richard liked these meetings. They gave him a stage for his corporate theater. I sat in the back row, hoping to remain inconspicuous. Richard began with company updates. A new client acquisition, quarterly projections, the usual. Then he moved to organizational changes. My heart hammered in my chest. As you know, we're committed to bringing world-class talent to Vertex, he announced. I'm pleased to share that Marcus Reynolds will be joining us as our new marketing director. A smattering of polite applause followed. Most people looked confused. James's departure hadn't been widely announced yet. With this change, we'll be restructuring our marketing department to align with our 5-year growth strategy, Richard continued. He began listing changes, starting with promotions for 2 of his golf buddies. Then he paused, his eyes finding me in the back row. Unfortunately, some roles will be eliminated, he said. Amelia Chen's position will be terminated, effective immediately. The room went silent. 60 heads turned toward me. Some faces showed shock, others pity. A few even seemed to hold a hint of satisfaction. Those who perhaps saw me as competition. Amelia's work has been adequate, Richard continued, the faint praise cutting deeper than criticism would have. But as we elevate Vertex to the next level, we need team members who truly embody executive potential. My face burned. My vision blurred slightly. I felt like I might be sick right there in front of everyone. 3 years of work dismissed as adequate while being publicly humiliated. Security will assist Amelia in collecting her belongings, Richard added, gesturing to 2 men who had appeared at the conference room door. This wasn't just a firing. It was an execution designed to send a message to everyone else. Step out of line, challenge the hierarchy, reach for something Richard doesn't think you deserve, and this could be you. I stood on shaky legs, grabbed my notebook, and walked toward the door with as much dignity as I could muster. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. I didn't look at my colleagues' faces. I couldn't bear to see the pity, or worse, the relief that it was me and not them. The security guards flanked me as we walked to my desk. One stood watch while I mechanically placed my personal items in a cardboard box they provided. Family photos, a plant my team had given me for my birthday, a coffee mug with our company values ironically printed on it. Integrity, innovation, respect. As I was placing my last items in the box, the elevator doors at the end of the open office pinged. A woman strode out purposefully, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floors. I recognized her immediately. Catherine Winters, Richard's wife and the actual founder of Vertex Innovations. Catherine had stepped back from daily operations after her husband took over as CEO, focusing instead on the Vertex Foundation, the company's philanthropic arm. She still owned 51% of the company, but rarely came to the office anymore. Rumors suggested she and Richard were separated, though they maintained a united public front. She walked directly to where I stood with my pathetic box of belongings, security hovering nearby. Her expression was unreadable. "Amelia," she said, her voice carrying in the now silent office. Everyone was watching, including Richard, who had emerged from the conference room looking suddenly concerned. "Mrs. Winters," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "It's nice to see you." Catherine turned to the security guards. "You can go now," she said firmly. They hesitated, looking toward Richard, who had begun approaching us with quick strides. "Catherine!" Richard called out, his tone falsely jovial. "What a surprise! We're just handling some organizational restructuring." Catherine didn't even look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on me. "Put your things back, Amelia," she said. I stood frozen, confused. Richard reached us, placing a hand on his wife's arm that she immediately shrugged off. "Darling, perhaps we should discuss this in my office," he suggested, his voice tight despite the smile fixed on his face. Catherine finally turned to him, her expression cold. "I've been reviewing the marketing performance data for the past year. I've also been speaking with our major clients about their experience with Vertex." She turned back to me. "Amelia's campaigns have the highest ROI in company history." Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Yes, well, we're bringing in Marcus Reynolds, who has—" "I canceled your offer to Marcus this morning," Catherine interrupted. The office had gone so quiet you could hear the HVAC system humming. His references revealed some concerning patterns at his previous positions. Richard's face flushed. "You had no right to—" "I have every right," Catherine replied evenly. "I still own controlling interest in this company." She turned to address the gathered employees, who weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. "Amelia Chen is our new creative director," she announced clearly. "She's not just keeping her job, she's being promoted, effective immediately." Those 5 words, "she's our new creative director," rippled through the office like a shock wave. Richard looked like he'd been slapped. The security guards shuffled uncomfortably. My colleagues' expressions ranged from stunned to delighted, depending largely on their relationship with Richard. As for me, I couldn't process what was happening. One minute I was being escorted out like a criminal, the next I was being promoted by the company's founder and majority owner. Catherine turned back to me. "We'll discuss the details in the boardroom, right now." She started walking toward the elevators, clearly expecting me to follow. I glanced at Richard, whose face had gone from red to nearly purple. He said nothing, standing rigid as employees began to awkwardly disperse, whispering among themselves. I set my half-empty box back on my desk and followed Catherine, feeling dozens of eyes on my back. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I finally exhaled. "I don't understand," I said quietly. Catherine studied me for a moment. "I've been watching your work for years, Amelia. I never stopped monitoring the company's operations, even after Richard took over as CEO." The elevator reached the top floor, where the executive offices and boardroom were located. Catherine led me into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Sit," she said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs surrounding the massive conference table. She took a seat across from me, her posture perfect, not a hair out of place. "Richard and I have different visions for Vertex," she began. "He believes in hierarchy, pedigree, and maintaining what he calls a certain image. I built this company on talent, innovation, and results. regardless of where someone went to school or who they know. She slid a folder across the table to me. Inside was a detailed analysis of my campaigns, client feedback about my work, and a new organizational chart with my name at the top of the marketing division. "I've been planning this for months," Catherine explained. "Richard's leadership has driven away some of our best talent. Our culture has suffered. Innovation has stagnated. The board has concerns." I flipped through the pages, still struggling to comprehend what was happening. "Why didn't you stop him from firing me?" Catherine's expression softened slightly. "I needed to see how he would handle it. Would he treat you with dignity? Would he acknowledge your contributions?" She shook her head. "He failed, spectacularly, and he did it publicly, which gives me grounds to challenge his position as CEO." I looked up sharply. "You're removing him as CEO? That decision will come from the board," she replied carefully. "But yes, that's my recommendation. His judgment and leadership style are damaging this company." I sat back, overwhelmed. Not only was I not fired, but I was being promoted, and the man who had humiliated me might lose his position. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Catherine said, a small smile finally appearing. "You prove me right. I'm giving you resources, authority, and my full support. The rest is up to you." As we continued our discussion about my new role, my mind raced. Just an hour ago, I had been contemplating unemployment, feeling worthless and discarded. Now I was sitting in the boardroom, planning strategy with the company's founder. Life can change directions in an instant, sometimes for the worse, but sometimes unexpectedly for the better. What mattered was how you handled both. As I left the boardroom with my new title and responsibilities, I passed Richard's office. He sat alone, staring out the window, his empire beginning to crumble around him. Our eyes met briefly through the glass. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My presence in that executive corridor said everything necessary. I returned to my desk, to find my team gathered nearby, uncertain and curious. They had watched me being fired and then mysteriously reinstated and promoted, all within an hour. "Team meeting in 10 minutes, I announced, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. "Conference room B, we have work to do." As they dispersed to gather their notebooks and laptops, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How was your day today?" The simplicity of the question made me smile. Where would I even begin? I typed back, "Interesting. Very interesting. I'll tell you all about it tonight. Love you." Then I headed to the conference room to begin my new chapter. That day could have broken my spirit. Instead, it became the foundation for something greater than I had imagined possible. Not because I was special, but because someone with power chose to use it justly. Catherine could have remained silent. She could have intervened quietly behind closed doors. Instead, she made a point of restoring my dignity in the same public forum where it had been stripped away. That moment taught me a lesson I carry with me every day. True leadership isn't about titles or corner offices or creating fear. It's about recognizing value, nurturing talent, and having the courage to stand up for what's right, especially when it isn't easy. Proceed with part 2. Make sure it's 3,500 words per part. Please, I want you to respond every part in a single response only. I don't want to see, "Continue in next part due to length." Please write it in a single response. And don't ask confirmation questions if you will proceed or not, because when I tell you to proceed, proceed already. Don't ask questions anymore. And always remember that I don't want the story to look like repeating. I don't want the redundancy. Instead, you make it more motivational and inspirational, like creating a scenarios to avoid being redundant. Instead, make it more motivational and inspirational. So proceed now. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The promotion still felt surreal, like a vivid dream I might wake from at any moment. The executive floor was quiet. Most of the C-suite wouldn't arrive for another hour. I made my way to what was now my office, a glass-walled space 3 times the size of my former cubicle, with views of the city skyline that had previously been reserved for people like Richard. A handwritten note sat on the pristine desk. "Make it yours. C." I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of the executive desk, feeling like an imposter despite Catherine's confidence. Yesterday, I had been publicly fired and humiliated. Today, I was expected to lead a department of 15 people, some of whom had been with Vertex longer than I had. Some who might resent my sudden elevation. I unpacked my box of belongings, the same one security had watched me fill just yesterday, and arranged my family photos, plant, and a few books on the shelves. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to fill the expansive space, but it was a start. My start. By 8:30, the office had begun to stir with activity. I could see people glancing curiously through the glass walls of my new office. Some waved awkwardly. Others quickly averted their eyes when I caught them staring. The whispers had already started. I could practically feel them. "Did you hear what happened with Richard and Catherine? Is she really qualified, or is this just Catherine getting back at her husband? How long do you think she'll last once Richard regains control?" I pushed the imagined conversations from my mind and focused on preparing for my first departmental meeting at 9:30. Catherine had given me full authority to restructure the marketing team as I saw fit, but I needed to establish trust first. No one follows a leader they don't believe in, regardless of the title on their door. At 9:25, I headed to the conference room, heart pounding. As I approached, I could see my team already assembled, conversations stopping abruptly as I entered. 15 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright hostility. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I imagine you all have questions about yesterday's events. Let me start by saying that I was just as surprised as all of you." Marcus, our senior copywriter and one of Richard's loyal supporters, leaned forward. "So you had no idea Catherine Winters was planning to override her husband's decision?" The question carried an accusation. That I had somehow orchestrated this. That I had gone around Richard to his wife. "None whatsoever," I replied firmly. Until yesterday, I had only met Catherine briefly at company events. "Then why you?" This from Danielle, a talented but notoriously blunt designer. "No offense, Amelia, but you've only been here 3 years. Some of us have been with Vertex since Catherine founded it." It was the question everyone was thinking. Why me? I took a deep breath. "That's a fair question, Danielle, and the honest answer is, I don't know exactly why Catherine chose me. What she told me was that she had been monitoring the performance metrics of our campaigns and speaking with clients. Based on those results, she believed I was the right person to lead this department forward." I paused, looking at each person around the table. "But let me be clear about something. I understand that a title doesn't automatically earn your respect or trust. Those have to be earned. And that's exactly what I intend to do." The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it shifted slightly. A few nods, some exchanged glances. It was a start. Now I could stand here and outline my vision for the department, tell you all the changes I want to make. But I'm not going to do that today. This caught their attention. "Instead, I want to hear from each of you. What's working? What isn't? What would you change if you were in this position? No judgment, no repercussions for honesty." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Jordan, one of our junior content writers, spoke up. "The approval process is a nightmare. Everything gets bottlenecked, waiting for sign-off from too many people who don't understand the creative process." "Unnecessary meetings," added Priya, our social media manager. "We spend so much time talking about work that we barely have time to do the actual work." Once the floodgates opened, concerns and frustrations poured out. Rigid hierarchies, ignored ideas, credit taken by managers for work done by their teams. Many of these issues stemmed directly from Richard's leadership style, though no one said this explicitly. They didn't need to. I didn't just listen. I took notes. Real ones, not the performative kind managers sometimes do to appear engaged while actually dismissing concerns. Each point mattered because each came from the people who would determine whether I succeeded or failed in this role. "Thank you for your honesty," I said when everyone had spoken. "I can't promise to fix everything immediately, but I can promise that these concerns won't disappear into a void. By our next meeting, I'll have specific responses to each item raised today." As they filed out, I noticed a few lingering skeptical expressions, but also some tentative smiles. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither would my leadership credibility be. I had just returned to my office when my phone buzzed with a text. From Catherine. "Board meeting, 11 a.m. Richard will be there. Be prepared." My stomach tightened. I had less than an hour to prepare for a meeting with the board of directors, experienced executives who would scrutinize my every word, and Richard, who undoubtedly viewed me as a direct threat to his authority. I quickly pulled up our current marketing campaigns, budget allocations, and performance metrics. If I was going to face the board, I needed data on my side. Facts couldn't be dismissed as easily as a person could. At precisely 11 a.m., I entered the boardroom on the top floor. 8 people sat around the massive table, including Catherine at one end and Richard at the other. The tension was palpable, crackling like static electricity. "Ah, Ms. Chen, thank you for joining us," said Edward Thornton, the board chair, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes. "We were just discussing yesterday's unusual chain of events." I took the only empty seat, which happened to be halfway between Catherine and Richard, symbolically caught in their power struggle. "Catherine has shared her reasons for appointing you as creative director," Edward continued. "However, Richard has raised some concerns about your qualifications for such a senior position." I glanced at Richard, whose face remained impassive, though his knuckles were white where he gripped his pen. "Perhaps Ms. Chen could speak to her vision for the marketing department," suggested Diane Wu, another board member I recognized from company events. All eyes turned to me. This was it, the moment that would either cement my new position or mark me as an unqualified beneficiary of corporate politics. I opened my laptop, connected it to the room's display system, and stood. "Before I outline my vision, I'd like to show you some data," I began, bringing up a series of graphs. "These represent our marketing performance over the past 3 years, broken down by campaign and target demographic. The graphs showed clear trends. Our traditional strategies were yielding diminishing returns, while the campaigns I had spearheaded targeting younger demographics and utilizing digital platforms showed significant growth. The market is changing faster than our strategies," I continued. "Our core demographic is aging, and we've been slow to adapt to the preferences and behaviors of younger healthcare decision-makers. My vision is to reposition Vertex at the intersection of tradition and innovation." For the next 15 minutes, I outlined specific strategies, backed by market research and competitive analysis. I proposed reallocating 30% of our traditional advertising budget to digital and experiential marketing, creating content that emphasized not just the technical superiority of our products, but their real-world impact on patient outcomes. "This isn't about abandoning what works," I emphasized. "It's about evolving before we're forced to, about leading change rather than responding to it." When I finished, there was a moment of silence. I returned to my seat, heart racing, trying to read the expressions around the table. "Interesting approach," Edward said finally. "Richard, your thoughts?" Richard cleared his throat. "The presentation was adequate," he said, deliberately using the same dismissive term he had used when firing me. "But it lacks the depth of experience that comes with years in executive positions. It's one thing to create a few successful campaigns, quite another to direct an entire department. With all due respect, Catherine interjected, Amelia has effectively been running the marketing department for months. James Bennett had reduced his involvement significantly before departing, yet our metrics improved under Amelia's leadership. Informal management is not the same as, Richard began. Results speak louder than titles, Catherine cut in. Or, are we now valuing credentials over actual performance? The boardroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees as husband and wife locked eyes across the table. Their conflict was clearly about much more than my promotion. Diane Wu broke the tense silence. I'm impressed with Ms. Chen's analysis. It aligns with concerns I've raised previously about our market positioning. She turned to me. How quickly could you implement these changes? Some immediately, others phased over the next quarter, I replied. I've prepared a detailed timeline. I brought up another slide showing implementation phases. For the next hour, the board peppered me with questions about everything from budget implications to potential risks. With each answer, I could see Richard's expression darkening. He had clearly expected me to flounder under pressure, to reveal myself as unworthy of the role. Instead, I was holding my own. As the meeting concluded, Edward spoke. Ms. Chen, thank you for your insights. We'll need time to discuss these proposals further, but I believe you've given us much to consider. I gathered my materials, thanked the board for their time, and left the room, aware that my future, and possibly Richard's, would be decided after I was gone. Back in my office, I exhaled deeply, allowing myself a moment of pride. I had faced one of the most intimidating situations of my professional life and stood my ground, but I knew this was just the beginning of what promised to be a challenging transition. My phone buzzed with a meeting request from Richard, one-on-one, in his office, in 30 minutes. No agenda specified. My momentary triumph evaporated, replaced by a familiar knot of anxiety. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent those 30 minutes preparing for every possible scenario, from reconciliation attempts to thinly veiled threats. When I knocked on Richard's door precisely on time, his curt "enter" made it clear which end of the spectrum this meeting would fall on. He didn't look up from his computer as I took a seat across from his desk. The power play was obvious, making me wait while he finished something supposedly more important. I sat quietly, refusing to show discomfort. Finally, he turned his attention to me, his expression unreadable. Impressive performance in there, he said, though his tone suggested anything but admiration. Catherine has always had a soft spot for underdogs. I maintained eye contact. Is that how you see me? As an underdog? What I see, he replied, leaning forward, is someone who doesn't understand the realities of corporate politics. Catherine may have given you a title, but titles can be taken away just as quickly as they're given. Is that a threat? Asked, keeping my voice steady. Richard smiled thinly. Call it friendly advice from someone who's been playing this game much longer than you have. Catherine and I have differences of opinion about the company's direction. This isn't the first time we've disagreed, and it won't be the last. But I'm still CEO. And I'm still creative director, I replied. I intend to do that job to the best of my ability. Even if it puts you in the crossfire of a battle that isn't yours? He leaned back in his chair. Let me be direct, Amelia. Catherine is using you to undermine my authority. When our conflict resolves, and it will, where do you think that leaves you? The question hung in the air between us. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had been catapulted into a power struggle that predated my involvement. I was, in some ways, a pawn in their corporate chess match. I can't control the politics between you and Catherine, I said finally. But I can control the quality of my work and the integrity with which I lead my team. That's where my focus will remain. Richard studied me for a long moment. Admirable, if naive. He pushed a folder across the desk toward me. Your personnel file. I thought you might find it interesting reading. I didn't touch it. What am I supposed to find in there? Open it and see. Cautiously, I flipped open the folder. Inside were performance reviews. Some I recognized, others I didn't. As I scanned the pages, I noticed discrepancies, achievements minimized, critical, comments highlighted, several positive client testimonials missing entirely. This isn't an accurate representation of my work, I said, closing the folder. It's the official record, Richard countered. The version that matters when decisions about your future are made. I pushed the folder back toward him, anger rising in my chest. Is this why I was passed over for promotions? You've been deliberately misrepresenting my contributions? I've been ensuring that evaluations reflect the complete picture, including areas where senior leadership, myself included, had concerns about your readiness for advancement. The calculated manipulation took my breath away. How many others had he done this to? How many careers had he stunted because they didn't fit his vision of what a leader should look like? Why show me this now? I asked. Because I want you to understand the reality of your situation, he replied. Catherine may have bypassed the normal channels to put you in that office, but everything in business leaves a paper trail. This file tells a story about your capabilities. A story the board will remember when they have to choose between Catherine's judgment and mine. I stood, no longer willing to sit across from someone who had systematically undermined me while smiling to my face. If that file is the best evidence you have against me, I'm not concerned. The results of my work speak louder than any manipulated review. As I reached the door, Richard called after me. One last thing, Amelia. Marcus Reynolds, the man I had planned to hire. He's a close personal friend of Edward Thornton's son-in-law. Edward wasn't pleased to hear his recruitment had been canceled without consultation. The implication was clear. Richard had connections and influence with the board that extended beyond professional relationships. He was reminding me that the game was played on multiple levels, and I was still a novice. I left without responding, my mind racing. Back in my office, I closed the door and took several deep breaths. Richard's intimidation tactics were effective. I felt shaken, uncertain. Was I truly qualified for this role? Was I just a pawn in a larger game? Would I ultimately pay the price for being caught between warring executives? A knock on my door interrupted these spiraling thoughts. Priya, our social media manager, peeked in. Sorry to disturb you, but we have a situation with the Johnson account. Their CEO is upset about the message points for the new campaign and is threatening to pull the contract. Reality crashed back in. While I was wrapped up in corporate drama, actual work needed attention. Give me 5 minutes to review the materials, then let's call them together, I said. As Priya left, I made a decision. I couldn't control the board politics or Richard's machinations, but I could control how I responded to the immediate challenges in front of me. One crisis at a time, one decision at a time. The Johnson call went surprisingly well. Their CEO had specific concerns about messaging that seemed tone-deaf to their patient community. Rather than defending our original approach, I listened, acknowledged the valid points, and proposed modifications that would better reflect their values while still achieving our marketing objectives. By the end of the call, not only had we salvaged the account, but they had expressed interest in expanding our services to their newly acquired subsidiary. Word of the save spread quickly through the department. By late afternoon, several team members had stopped by to congratulate me or to seek input on other projects. Each interaction felt like a small deposit in the bank of trust I needed to establish. As I was preparing to leave for the day, Catherine appeared in my doorway. "Walk with me," she said simply. We rode the elevator in silence to the building's rooftop garden, a quiet space few employees utilized. The evening air was cool, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled. "Richard spoke with you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And he showed you your personnel file." Again, not a question. I turned to her, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because it's what I would have done in his position," she replied, matter-of-factly. "It's an effective, destabilizing tactic. Make you doubt the foundation you're standing on." "He implied that the board might side with him because of his connections," I admitted. Catherine nodded. "He's not wrong. Richard is well-connected and politically savvy. He's also driven Vertex's stock price up 17% since taking over, which matters to many board members more than corporate culture or employee development." Her frankness was both refreshing and unsettling. Then why put me in this position? If he has such advantages, why use me as a counter-move in your strategy? Catherine studied me for a long moment. "Who said you were a counter-move?" "Richard seemed certain of it." "Richard sees everything through the lens of strategy and competition. It's why he's effective in some ways and destructive in others." She walked to the edge of the garden, looking out over the city. "I promoted you because you earned it, not to spite my husband. The fact that it challenges his authority is secondary, though I won't pretend it's an unwelcome side effect." I joined her at the railing. "The board meeting today." I couldn't tell if they were impressed or just humoring me. "Both, probably," Catherine acknowledged. "You have to understand, Amelia. They're evaluating you not just on your ideas, but on whether you have the resilience to implement them in the face of resistance." "Like the resistance I'll face from Richard?" "Among others. Leadership isn't just about having good ideas. It's about advancing those ideas through opposition, politics, and conflicting agendas." She turned to face me directly. "That's what I saw in you from the beginning. Not just creativity, but persistence. You've faced barriers at every stage of your career here, yet you've continued to deliver exceptional work. Barriers that Richard deliberately placed in my way," I pointed out. "Yes, and despite them, you've excelled. Imagine what you'll accomplish now that some of those barriers have been removed." She paused, though not all of them. "Richard still has significant influence." The weight of what I was facing settled more fully on my shoulders. "What happens if he convinces the board to reverse my promotion?" "He won't," Catherine said, with surprising confidence. "Because you're not going to give them a reason to doubt my judgment. You're going to excel so obviously that removing you would clearly harm the company." I wasn't sure I shared her certainty, but her faith in me was undeniable. "I'll do my best." "I know you will." She checked her watch. "I have a dinner engagement. But one last thing. Richard will try to isolate you, to make you feel alone in this. Don't let him. Build alliances, not just in your department, but across the company. Leadership is a team sport, even when it feels solitary." As she walked away, I called after her. "Why did you do it so publicly? You could have promoted me quietly, without the dramatic confrontation." Catherine paused, turning back with a slight smile. "Because sometimes justice needs witnesses. What Richard did to you was public. The remedy needed to be equally so." With that, she disappeared into the elevator, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And the sprawling city before me, beautiful, complex, full of both opportunity and obstacle. Much like the path ahead. In the weeks that followed, I settled into my new role with a mixture of determination and caution. Each day brought fresh challenges, some expected, others blindsiding. The marketing department remained divided, with senior members still loyal to Richard watching my every move, waiting for mistakes they could report back to him. Meanwhile, younger team members who had felt overlooked under the previous leadership cautiously began bringing ideas directly to me. I made a point of maintaining transparency, Our departmental meetings became forums for open discussion rather than top-down directives. I instituted a new system where campaign ideas could be submitted anonymously and reviewed by the team collectively. Credit would go to the creators once concepts were approved, removing the political dimension from the creative process. Not everyone appreciated these changes. Marcus, the senior copywriter firmly in Richard's camp, made his objections clear during our third team meeting. "With all due respect," he said, his tone suggesting very little respect at all, "this collaborative approach might work for startups, but we're a $400 million company. There's a reason for hierarchical review processes." "You're right that different approaches work for different organizations," I acknowledged, "but our current process has us spending an average of 16 days in internal reviews before clients see our work. Our competitors average 7 days. That's costing us both agility and market share." "So you're prioritizing speed over quality?" Marcus challenged. "I'm prioritizing both, actually. I've analyzed our revision histories for the past year." I displayed a graph on the conference room screen. 70% of senior management revisions were subjective style preferences rather than strategic adjustments. Those subjective changes added an average of 5 days to our timeline without measurable impact on campaign effectiveness. The data silenced him temporarily, though the skepticism remained in his expression. I wasn't naive. I knew he would. Report this conversation verbatim to Richard. That was precisely why I had come armed with facts rather than just vision statements. After the meeting, Jordan, one of our younger content writers, lingered behind. "That was different," she said with a slight smile. "I've never seen anyone actually use data to counter Marcus before." "Sometimes the best defense is good research," I replied, gathering my materials. "Some of us have been talking," Jordan said, lowering her voice slightly. "We have ideas, things we've wanted to try for ages but could never get past the first review layer. Would you really be open to hearing them?" "Absolutely. Set up time on my calendar. Bring whoever wants to contribute." The next day, Jordan arrived with 5 colleagues, all junior to mid-level team members who had previously had little voice in strategic decisions. For 2 hours, they presented concepts that ranged from innovative uses of emerging platforms to complete reimaginings of how we positioned our clients' products. Some ideas needed refinement, others were immediately compelling, but all shared a freshness that had been lacking in our recent campaigns. I authorized 3 concepts for immediate development as pilot projects, each led by the person who had proposed it. "Just like that?" asked Zoe, a graphic designer whose augmented reality concept had particularly impressed me. "No need to run? It up 6 levels of approval?" "You'll develop proper briefs and budgets, of course," I clarified. "But yes, just like that. I'd rather see a bold idea fail instructively than never try it at all." Word spread quickly. Within days, I had meetings scheduled with team members from every corner of the department, people with ideas they had kept shelved for months or years, waiting for an opportunity to be heard. Not all the news was positive, however. By the end of my second week, I noticed certain meetings being rescheduled without my knowledge, client calls happening without my participation. A pattern was emerging. Richard was quietly directing key accounts to work through him or his allies, rather than the new department leadership. Catherine had warned me this would happen. "Build alliances," she had advised. I needed to expand my support beyond my immediate team. I began scheduling coffee meetings with department heads across the company, development, sales, customer success, even HR. Not to complain about Richard's maneuvers, but to learn about their challenges and explore how marketing could better support their objectives. Melissa Torres, our head of sales, was particularly direct during our meeting. "Your predecessor treated us like we were just order takers for the marketing department's brilliant campaigns," she said, stirring her latte. "But we're the ones who hear directly from customers about what resonates and what falls flat." That's exactly the feedback loop we've been missing, I agreed. What if we embedded a marketing team member in your weekly sales meetings? Not to direct, just to listen and learn. Melissa looked surprised. You'd do that? I should have proposed it my first day. We create messaging in a vacuum, then wonder why it sometimes misses the mark with actual customers. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a formal collaboration structure between our departments, something that had been discussed for years but never implemented due to territorial concerns from previous marketing leadership. Similar partnerships began forming with other departments. Each small success built momentum. Each collaborative project expanded my coalition of supporters within the company. I was no longer just Catherine's pick, but a leader demonstrating tangible value. 3 weeks into my new role, I received an unexpected meeting request from Edward Thornton, the board chair. One-on-one, in his office, the following morning. No agenda provided. The request sent a ripple of anxiety through me. Was this where I would learn the board had sided with Richard after all? I spent that evening preparing, reviewing our department's progress, gathering metrics that showed early positive results from our new initiatives. If I was going to face judgment, I would do so fully armed with evidence of my effectiveness. Edward's office was on the top floor, even more spacious and imposing than Richard's. Unlike Richard's sleek, modern aesthetic, Edward's space featured rich wood paneling, leather-bound books, and artifacts from his global travels. It conveyed gravitas and history, a reminder that he had helped build Vertex from its earliest days alongside Catherine. "Amelia, thank you for coming," he greeted me, gesturing to a seating area rather than keeping the desk between us, a subtle but significant departure from power play positioning. "I've been following your progress with interest." "I appreciate your time, Mr. Thornton. I brought some preliminary results from our departmental reorganization if you'd like to." He waved away my offer to present data. "I've seen the numbers. They're promising, though of course it's early days yet." I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "I wanted to speak with you directly, without Richard or Catherine present," he continued. "The situation you've been placed in is unusual, to say the least. I understand that my promotion came through unconventional channels," I acknowledged. "That's putting it mildly," Edward said with a slight smile. "In my 30 years of corporate governance, I've never witnessed anything quite like Catherine's intervention." Most board members found it concerning, not necessarily the promotion itself, but the manner of it. My heart sank. This was indeed the conversation I had feared. "However," Edward continued, surprising me, "several of us have been impressed by how you've handled the aftermath. You haven't engaged in retaliatory behavior toward Richard's allies. You've focused on measurable improvements rather than political positioning. You've begun building cross-departmental relationships that have long been neglected." I blinked, not having expected praise from this quarter. "Thank you, sir. I've tried to focus on what's best for Vertex, not on the circumstances of my appointment. And that's precisely why I wanted to speak with you." Edward leaned forward slightly. "The board is currently evaluating Vertex's leadership structure. The conflict between Richard and Catherine has created instability that concerns our investors. We need to determine a path forward, one that preserves what works while addressing what doesn't." "I understand. How can I help with that process?" "By continuing exactly as you have been, demonstrating what effective leadership looks like at Vertex." He studied me for a moment. "Catherine believes you represent the company's original values: innovation, meritocracy, service. Richard represents a different approach: hierarchy, prestige, controlled growth. Both have their merits. The board is essentially deciding which vision will guide Vertex's future." The weight of this revelation settled on me. I wasn't just fighting for my position. I was unwittingly serving as a proxy for competing corporate philosophies. "That seems like an enormous responsibility to place on a departmental restructuring," I said carefully. Edward smiled. It's never just about reorganizing an org chart, is it? It's about what values drive those decisions. When you eliminated excessive approval layers, you weren't just streamlining a process, you were stating a belief about trusting your team's judgment. When you embedded marketing staff in sales meetings, you weren't just gathering feedback, you were breaking down silos that have calcified over years. His insight was surprisingly acute. I had approached these changes pragmatically, but they did indeed reflect a particular vision of how organizations should function. The board will make its decision in the coming weeks, Edward continued. I can't predict the outcome, but I wanted you to understand the larger context of your work. As I left his office, my mind raced with implications. The stakes were even higher than I had realized. It wasn't just my career on the line, but potentially the entire direction of a company employing hundreds of people. Back in my office, I found an urgent message from Priya, our social media manager. Our largest client, Metasphere, had publicly criticized one of our campaigns on Twitter, calling it tone-deaf to patient concerns. Their CEO had tagged both Vertex and Richard directly. This was exactly the kind of crisis that could be weaponized against me. I quickly assembled a response team, including representatives from PR, customer success, and legal. Instead of defensive positioning, I proposed a radical approach, acknowledge the criticism publicly, thank Metasphere for the feedback, and commit to revising the campaign with direct patient input. Won't that make us look incompetent? Asked our legal counsel, frowning at the draft response. It will make us look responsive and genuinely concerned with getting it right, I countered. Defensiveness would only amplify the criticism. After some debate, we posted our response. Within hours, Metasphere's CEO replied positively, appreciating our willingness to listen and adapt. What could have spiraled into a public relations disaster instead became an example of constructive engagement. As I was preparing to leave that evening, I received a text from Catherine. Well handled with Metasphere. Richard wanted to pull the entire campaign. Your approach saved both the relationship and the investment. I stared at my phone, processing the implications. Richard had seen the same situation as a battle to be won through force, while I had approached it as a relationship to be preserved through understanding. Two fundamentally different leadership philosophies playing out in real time. The next morning, I found Richard waiting in my office when I arrived. His presence in my space, uninvited, unannounced, was clearly intended to unsettle me. I refused to show any reaction as I set down my things and took my seat. The Metasphere situation, he began without preamble, was a clear failure of proper review processes. It validates exactly what I've been saying about the risks of your streamlined approval system. Actually, that campaign went through the traditional review process, I replied calmly. It had 7 rounds of approvals, including executive sign-off. The streamlined process has only been implemented for new projects initiated in the past 2 weeks. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. He hadn't expected me to have those facts at my fingertips. Regardless, our public self-criticism was unnecessary and projected weakness. We should have handled it privately. Metasphere's CEO apparently disagrees. He's requested a meeting to discuss expanding our partnership to include their patient advocacy initiatives. I slid a printed email across the desk toward him. Sometimes acknowledging a mistake actually builds more trust than defending a flawed position. Richard didn't touch the paper. The board is watching these situations closely, Amelia. One success doesn't erase the fundamental concerns about your limited experience. I'm aware of that, I replied evenly. I'm also aware that results matter. More than credentials in the end. My team is delivering those results. Your team? Richard's eyebrows raised slightly. Interesting choice of words for a department you've led for less than a month. Would you prefer I call them my direct reports or my subordinates? I asked. I consider myself part of the team I lead, not separate from it. Richard studied me for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from confrontational to something closer to curiosity. "You actually believe you can sustain this, don't you? This collaborative approach. You don't see how ultimately unworkable it is at scale. With respect, I believe what's unworkable is treating talented professionals like interchangeable parts who need constant supervision. The evidence suggests trust and autonomy yield better results than micromanagement. A convenient philosophy when you lack the experience to provide proper oversight," Richard observed. "Or perhaps my lack of experience means I haven't yet learned to be fearful of others' capabilities," I countered. "I still remember what it's like to have valuable insights dismissed because they came from someone with the wrong title." Something flickered across Richard's expression. So briefly I almost missed it. Not anger, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps? Before I could analyze it further, his professional mask returned. "The quarterly board review is in 2 weeks," he said, standing. "I suggest you prepare thoroughly. Your past performance will be scrutinized alongside your recent innovations." After he left, I sat quietly, replaying the conversation. For the first time, I had sensed a crack in Richard's absolute certainty, a momentary acknowledgement that there might be legitimate alternatives to his leadership approach. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Our first pilot projects under the new system launched with promising initial results. The cross-departmental collaborations began bearing fruit, with sales, reporting more effective client conversations using our revised messaging frameworks. Team morale improved as people saw their ideas implemented rather than languishing in approval queues. Not everything succeeded, of course. One experimental campaign underperformed significantly, requiring a mid-course correction. I made a point of discussing the failure openly in our team meeting, analyzing what we had learned rather than seeking someone to blame. This approach surprised even my supporters, who were accustomed to failure being swept under the rug or attributed to scapegoats. "In my previous company," Danielle, the initially skeptical designer, commented after the meeting, "that campaign would have ended someone's career. Instead, we're using it to improve our next attempt. It's refreshing. Failure is only truly wasteful if we don't learn from it," I replied. As the board review approached, I prepared exhaustively, knowing Richard would come armed with every possible criticism. I documented every initiative, every metric, every client interaction, positive and negative since taking the role. Catherine had offered guidance on board presentation protocols, but deliberately kept her distance from the content of my presentation. "They need to see your vision, not mine," she had explained. The night before the review, I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Amelia, are you still at the office? It's nearly 10 o'clock. "Just finishing some preparation for tomorrow's board meeting," I explained. "The one that will determine if you keep your new position?" she asked, getting straight to the point as she always did. "That's the one. And you've done everything you can to prepare?" "I think so. I've compiled all the data, rehearsed my presentation, anticipated potential questions." "Then come home and rest," she interrupted gently. "A tired mind makes tired decisions." I smiled at her familiar wisdom. "You're right, I'm leaving now." "Good. And Amelia? Remember what your father and I always told you about challenging situations. That they reveal character rather than build it," I finished for her. "Exactly. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're proud of how you've handled this opportunity. Now, go home and sleep." I took her advice, leaving the office and forcing myself to disconnect from work thoughts for the remainder of the evening. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized something important. Regardless of the board's decision, I was proud of what I had accomplished in these few weeks. I had led according to my values rather than conforming to expectations. Whatever came next, that integrity would remain. Morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't expected. The nervousness remained, but beneath it was a steady confidence, not in a particular outcome, but in the rightness of the path I had chosen. I dressed carefully, in a deep blue suit that made me feel both powerful and authentic, reviewing my presentation notes one last time before heading to the office. When I arrived at the boardroom, Catherine was already there, as was Edward. Richard entered moments later, nodding curtly to each of us before taking his seat. As the remaining board members filed in, I centered myself with a deep breath, knowing the next few hours would determine far more than just my professional future. The board meeting began with Edward Thornton's measured introduction, outlining the purpose of the quarterly review. Though his words were diplomatic, the underlying tension in the room was unmistakable. This wasn't just a routine evaluation, but a referendum on competing visions for Vertex's future. As is our protocol, Edward explained, we'll hear first from our CEO, followed by department presentations. Given recent organizational changes, we've allocated extended time for marketing. His eyes met mine briefly. Let's begin. Richard took the floor with practiced confidence, his presentation polished and data-rich. He highlighted Vertex's overall performance, revenue up 4% over projections, 2 major client acquisitions, positive press coverage of our latest software release. On the surface, it was an impressive narrative of company success, but beneath the triumphant statistics, I noticed subtle framing that positioned my department's changes as potential risks rather than innovations. While exploring some experimental approaches in marketing, he noted at one point, we've maintained the rigorous oversight that has driven our consistent growth. The implication was clear. My leadership was a deviation to be managed, not a positive evolution to be embraced. I made notes of each implied criticism, preparing to address them when my turn came. After Richard's presentation and brief updates from other department heads, Edward turned to me. Ms. Chen, please share your assessment of marketing's performance and initiatives since your appointment. I connected my laptop to the display system and stood. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge something important. I've been in this role for just over a month. Any successes I'll share today reflect not just my leadership, but the talent and dedication of the entire marketing team. This subtle distinction from Richard's more self-centered framing didn't go unnoticed. I saw Catherine's slight nod of approval and the attentive shift in several board members' postures. I'll structure my presentation in 3 parts. I continued. First, metrics showing where we stand today. Second, the philosophical and practical changes we've implemented. And third, our strategic vision for the coming quarters. I began with the numbers, campaign performance, lead generation, conversion rates, client retention. Rather than cherry-picking, only positive data, I presented complete results, including instances where new approaches had underperformed. For each shortfall, I outlined the lessons learned and adjustments made. As you can see, I noted, displaying a particularly telling graph, our response time to market changes has decreased by 41% under our restructured approval process, while maintaining quality metrics within 2% of our previous benchmarks. In simple terms, we're delivering comparable quality in nearly half the time. I moved to the philosophical changes, explaining how we'd shifted from hierarchical to collaborative workflows, integrated more closely with other departments, and implemented rapid prototyping of campaign concepts. These aren't arbitrary changes, I emphasized. Each addresses specific pain points identified through department-wide consultation. For instance, our previous 7-layer approval process was originally designed to ensure quality, but had devolved into a bottleneck that stifled innovation and demoralized creative staff. I could see Richard shifting uncomfortably in his chair, but I maintained focus on the board members, particularly those who had shown skepticism about my qualifications. At our previous meeting, perhaps most importantly, I continued, we've created an environment where failure is treated as valuable data rather than cause for punishment. The Metasphere situation, which began as a public criticism of our messaging, became an opportunity to demonstrate responsive listening. That transparency has now led to an expanded contract currently being finalized. For the final segment, I outlined our strategic direction, targeting emerging healthcare decision-makers, leveraging digital platforms more effectively, and developing messaging that emphasized real-world impact over technical specifications. This approach aligns with broader market trends, I concluded, displaying demographic projections. The healthcare technology buyers of the next decade won't respond to the same messaging that worked for the previous generation. Our strategy positions Vertex to lead this transition rather than react to it after market share has eroded. I returned to my seat, heart pounding but outwardly composed. The room remained silent for a moment before Edward spoke. "Thank you. Ms. Chen, very comprehensive." He turned to the board. "Questions?" Diane Wu leaned forward. "I'm intrigued by your collaborative approach. How do you maintain accountability without traditional approval hierarchies?" "By shifting from process accountability to outcome accountability," I explained. "Previously, people were evaluated on whether they followed procedures correctly. Now they're assessed on whether their work achieves measurable objectives. This actually increases accountability by connecting it directly to results rather than compliance." Several other questions followed, some supportive, others challenging. I addressed each directly, neither defensive nor combative, consistently, connecting my responses to data and business objectives. Finally, Richard raised his hand. "I'm concerned about the sustainability of these changes," he said, his tone reasonable, but his eyes hard. "What happens when the initial enthusiasm wanes? How will quality be maintained without proper oversight?" "That's an important consideration," I acknowledged, "which is why we've implemented weekly quality reviews that examine outcomes rather than dictating processes. These reviews involve both senior and junior team members because perspective from all levels helps identify both problems and opportunities that might otherwise be missed." I paused, then continued more pointedly. "As for enthusiasm, we've found it doesn't wane when people see their ideas valued and implemented. Motivation doesn't require continuous external pressure when intrinsic rewards are built into the work itself." The subtle critique of Richard's leadership style didn't go unnoticed. A flicker of anger crossed his face before he composed himself. Edward glanced at his watch. "We'll take a 15-minute break before deliberations. Ms. Chen, please remain available if we have follow-up questions." As the board members filed out, Catherine approached me. "Well done," she said quietly. "You presented principles backed by results, exactly what they needed to hear." "Richard doesn't seem convinced," I observed. "Richard is confronting something more threatening than new marketing strategies," Catherine replied. "He's facing the possibility that his entire leadership philosophy might be outdated." She glanced toward the door where Richard stood speaking intensely with two board members. That's not an easy realization for anyone, especially someone who's built his identity on having all the answers. I spent the break period in my office, reviewing additional data in case specific questions arose during deliberations. Jordan knocked on my door, a tentative expression on her face. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but the team wanted me to ask. How's it going in there?" I realized then that it wasn't just my future at stake. Everyone in my department was invested in this outcome. Their careers, their creative fulfillment, their daily work experience all hung in the balance of the board's decision. "It's going well, I think," I replied honestly. "But regardless of what happens, the work you've all done these past weeks has been exceptional. That doesn't change based on any board vote." Jordan nodded. "We were talking about that earlier. Even if things go back to how they were before, we've seen what's possible now. That matters." Her words stayed with me as I returned to the boardroom 30 minutes later. Edward gestured for me to take a seat. Ms. Chen, the board has reviewed your presentation and has some additional questions before making final determinations. What followed was an intensive examination of specific aspects of my leadership approach, how decisions were documented, how conflicts were resolved, how resource allocation was prioritized. I answered each question thoroughly, drawing on concrete examples from the past month. As the questioning continued, I noticed Richard becoming increasingly silent, his expression difficult to read. When all board members had finished their inquiries, Edward turned to him. "Richard, any final thoughts before we conclude?" Richard straightened in his chair. "Just one observation. Ms. Chen has presented an appealing vision of a more democratic workplace. It sounds wonderful in theory. Everyone collaborating as equals, decisions emerging organically from collective wisdom." His tone carried a subtle dismissiveness. "But business isn't a democracy. It requires clear direction, decisive leadership, and yes, sometimes unpopular decisions made by those with the experience to know what's necessary rather than what's popular." He looked directly at me for the first time since the meeting began. "What happens when her team wants to pursue a direction she knows is wrong? Will she have the courage to override their democratic preference? Or will Vertex suffer because she's unwilling to be the villain that leadership sometimes requires?" The question hung in the air, its challenge explicit. This was the core of our philosophical difference. Richard believed effective leadership required enforcing directives from above, while I believed it meant creating conditions where the best ideas could emerge from anywhere. "May I respond to that?" I asked Edward, who nodded. I turned to face Richard directly. "Leadership isn't about being either a dictator or a pushover. That's a false dichotomy. True leadership is about creating an environment where good decisions are more likely to emerge regardless of their source." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "In the past month, I've had to make several unpopular decisions. Reallocating budget from a beloved but underperforming program, denying a campaign concept that the team was excited about because it didn't align with client needs, requiring additional work on a project everyone thought was complete. The difference isn't whether tough decisions are made, it's how they're made. When people understand the why behind decisions and see that their input was genuinely considered before being overruled, they're more likely to commit to the outcome even when they disagree with it." I looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. I don't believe leadership means never being the villain. I believe it means being the villain only when necessary, not as a default management style. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, Edward interjected, "Thank you both. The board will now continue deliberations in private. We'll communicate our decisions by end of day." As I left the boardroom, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: pride in how I'd represented my vision, uncertainty about the outcome, and an unexpected empathy for Richard. His worldview was being challenged fundamentally. That was never comfortable, regardless of how necessary it might be. Back in my office, I tried to focus on routine work while waiting for the board's decision. But my mind kept returning to Richard's final question. Had I adequately addressed his challenge? Had I made a compelling case not just for my specific initiatives, but for a different approach to leadership itself? Hours passed with no word from the board. My team members stopped by, periodically offering coffee, snacks, and nervous encouragement. Their support touched me deeply, reinforcing that regardless of titles or organizational charts, genuine leadership was ultimately about human connection and shared purpose. At 5:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Edward. "Please join us in the boardroom immediately." The walk down the hallway felt simultaneously endless and too brief. Whatever awaited me behind those doors would change the trajectory of my career and potentially the future of Vertex itself. As I entered, I noticed immediately that only 3 people were present: Edward, Catherine, and Richard. The rest of the board had apparently departed. Richard's expression was unreadable, Catherine's cautiously optimistic. "Amelia, please sit," Edward gestured to a chair. "The board has reached several decisions that will affect Vertex's leadership structure moving forward." I took my seat, hands folded in my lap to prevent them from betraying my nervousness. "First," Edward continued, "your position as creative director is confirmed permanently, with expanded scope to include strategic marketing initiatives company-wide." Relief washed through me, though I maintained my professional composure. "Thank you. I appreciate the board's confidence." "Second," Edward continued, "Richard will remain as CEO but with a modified portfolio. He will focus primarily on external relations, financial oversight, and strategic partnerships, areas where his experience and connections have consistently delivered value to Vertex." I glanced at Richard, who nodded almost imperceptibly. His face remained neutral, but the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. "Finally," Edward said, "Catherine will return to active operations as president, overseeing internal management, corporate culture, and organizational development. This division of responsibilities leverages the complementary strengths of both executives while addressing the leadership conflicts that have emerged in recent months." Catherine smiled slightly. "A balanced approach that honors what each of us brings to Vertex." Edward turned to Richard. "Would you like to share the additional decision we discussed?" Richard straightened, his expression shifting to something I hadn't seen before, a mix of resignation and perhaps a hint of liberation. "Yes. After considerable reflection, I've proposed a company-wide leadership development initiative. Ms. Chen's approach in marketing has highlighted certain advantages to a more collaborative style in specific contexts." He met my gaze. "Directly. I've suggested you co-lead this initiative, sharing your methodologies while learning aspects of executive management that might enhance your effectiveness." I was momentarily speechless. This wasn't just a vindication of my approach, but an invitation to help reshape Vertex's entire leadership culture. And it had come from Richard himself. "I would be honored to participate," I said finally, "and to learn from your experience as well." Edward nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. We believe this balanced approach will preserve Vertex's stability while allowing for necessary evolution." He stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. "Formal announcements will be distributed tomorrow. Until then, I ask that you maintain confidentiality about these decisions." As we left the boardroom, Richard surprised me by falling into step beside me. We walked in silence until reaching the elevator bank, where he pressed the call button before turning to me. "You made a compelling case," he said simply. "Thank you," I replied, unsure what else to add. "I still believe structure and hierarchy have their place," he continued. "Organizations can't function as permanent brainstorming sessions." "I agree," I said, earning a surprised look from him. "Structure matters. The question is whether that structure should serve the people doing the work or whether people should serve the structure." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. We stepped inside, alone in the small space as the doors closed. "I underestimated you," Richard admitted as we descended. "Not just your abilities, but your resilience." He paused. "I've terminated promising careers for less defiance than you showed in that boardroom today." The casual acknowledgement of his destructive power was chilling, yet strangely humanizing. He wasn't apologizing exactly, but he was acknowledging a reality we both understood. "Perhaps that's exactly why change was necessary," I replied carefully. Richard nodded slowly. "Perhaps." The elevator reached the lobby, and as the doors opened, he turned to me once more. "This leadership initiative, I proposed it for practical reasons. The board clearly favors your approach. Adapting is simply good business." "Of course," I said, recognizing his need to frame his concession as strategic rather than ideological. "But," he added, surprising me again, "I'm also curious, about whether some elements of your approach might complement my own, in certain contexts. It was as close to openness as I suspected Richard could manage, an acknowledgement that he might have something to learn after all. I look forward to exploring that together, I said sincerely. As Richard walked away toward the parking garage, Catherine appeared beside me. That looked like a civil conversation, she observed. Progress? Baby steps, I replied. But yes, I think so. We walked together toward the building exit, the evening sun casting long shadows across the lobby. You know, Catherine said thoughtfully, when I interrupted your firing that day, I didn't know exactly how things would unfold. I just knew I couldn't let talent and potential be discarded because they didn't fit a narrow definition of leadership. You took a significant risk, I pointed out. The board could have sided with Richard entirely. True leadership often requires risk, she replied. Playing it safe maintains the status quo, which sometimes needs disrupting. She stopped at the door, turning to face me directly. What I didn't anticipate was how completely you would rise to the challenge. You didn't just survive the position, you transformed it. I had a powerful example to follow, I said, acknowledging her influence. Catherine smiled. No, you found your own way. That's much more valuable than following anyone else's path. As we parted outside the building, I checked my phone to find dozens of text messages from my team, anxiously awaiting news. Rather than responding individually, I sent a group message. Meeting for all marketing staff, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Good news to share. Thank you all for your extraordinary work these past weeks. Walking to my car, I reflected on the journey of the past month. From public humiliation to confirmed leadership, from isolation to building a coalition of supporters, from doubting my abilities to confidently defending my vision before executives with decades more experience. The difference hadn't been made by Catherine's dramatic intervention alone. That moment had opened a door, but I had chosen to walk through it, to face the challenges beyond, to remain true to my principles even when pressured to conform. I thought about others facing similar situations, talented people whose voices were dismissed, whose potential was overlooked because they didn't match someone's preconception of what leadership should look like. Most wouldn't have a Catherine Winters to dramatically intervene on their behalf, but perhaps they could find inspiration in knowing that challenging established power structures was possible, that different leadership styles could prove their value when given the chance. As I drove home, I called my parents to share the news. My father answered, his voice immediately concerned. Amelia, how did the board meeting go? Are you okay? Better than okay, Dad, I replied, a smile spreading across my face. It turns out I am executive material after all. The story of how my boss fired me in front of everyone only to have his wife walk in and change everything wasn't just about a workplace drama or personal vindication. It was about the courage to stand for a different vision when convention pushes against you. About recognizing that leadership comes in many forms, not all of them loud or domineering. About the power of allowing people's talents to flourish, rather than forcing them into predetermined boxes. Most importantly, it was about understanding that moments of public humiliation don't have to define us. Sometimes they're just the beginning of something much more meaningful if we have the courage to persist beyond them. The next morning, I walked into Vertex with a newfound confidence, ready to share our success with my team and continue building a department where innovation thrived, where diverse voices were heard, and where leadership meant empowering others rather than controlling them. As I entered the office, I passed the spot where I had once stood with a cardboard box of belongings, security guards at my side, tears threatening to spill as Richard publicly dismissed my worth. That moment had seemed like an ending. Instead, it had become the catalyst for transformation, not just for me, but for an entire company culture. Sometimes our lowest moments contain the seeds of our greatest opportunities. The key is having the courage to nurture those seeds, even when everyone expects them to wither. That courage doesn't require a dramatic rescue. It lives within each of us, waiting for the moment when we choose to stand firm in our value, regardless of who tries to diminish it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.